Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is dedicated for the speedy and complete refuah shlema of Tamar Ayelet Bat Chuta, as well for the refuah shlema of Eliyahu Shlomo Mazar Fortuné, Chana Bat Simafeg. And the week of Kobru is dedicated and sponsored by David Yash in honor of you and your substantial capacity to do good today and every day. We also have from the previous days of breakfast that were not yet mentioned. Breakfast in the Class dedicated in loving memory of Haron's mother, Angela Shohet, Alea Shalom Nishmat, on Jel Bat Lulu, on her third Askara, sponsored by Sandy and Haron Shohet. Also dedicated in loving memory of Nishmatim Reuven Ben Farha, Reuven Joseph Bibi, and Moshe Ben Victoria Mo David Gindi, Alea Mashalom, by the Bibi and Gindi families. My friends, let us begin. In Parashat Matot Masei, we read about the various journeys of the Jewish people, where Am Yisrael goes to various places on their way from Egypt all the way to Eretz Israel. However, what's interesting is that these journeys are also mentioned again in Sefer Devarim in the beginning. And when we mention those journeys, we speak about those places that they went to in various veiled references. So as an example, we might mention Di Zahav, we might mention other things, right? Each one mentioned as a hint to the place that we're referring to. And the question Al Chachamim ask is, what was the purpose of naming or renaming these places by names, as the Gemara says, the name of Yochanan, that no one ever heard of? No one ever called that place by that name. And the Gemara answers, since in those places the Jewish people did something that they were not proud of, mentioning the name of the place would bring the Jewish people embarrassment. And I want you to listen to the words of the Midrash. The Midrash says, the Yalkut Shimoni expresses that Moshe said, what? You want me to embarrass them publicly by mentioning the things that they did, the bad things that they did, and I should lose my portion in Olam Haba? Says the Gemara, Kol HaMalbin Penei Havero Berabim, a person who whitens the face of his friend in public, En Lo Chelek LeOlam Haba, he has no portion in Olam Haba. Anyone who embarrasses someone in public has no portion in the world to come. Now, the Sfarim point out, sometimes you have a situation where you have a person, I'll never forget this, I always mention it. There are times when things financially get a little rocky. And I always remembered that when the crash happened in 2008, so there was a fellow who actually promised a very large donation, at least by our standards, to Chazak at the time. And I didn't, follow up all that closely. And, I waited until I got back to London, a couple, after the end of the summer. Anyway, I'm calling around. And that morning, I called this fellow and I said, listen, you very kindly donated $100,000 to Chazak, a very beautiful donation, Hazaku Baruch. And the guy says, he goes, are you not listening to the news? I said, what do you mean? He says, today, that was the morning of Lehman Brothers. The collapse of Lehman Brothers, that morning. He says, I'm sorry if I pledged 100,000. He goes, but all hell just broke loose. We're battening down the hatches, right? He goes, I can't, I'm sorry, I can't fulfill my pledge. Now, some people, Baruch Hashem, $100,000 is a huge amount of money. For some people, $100,000 is like a Misha Berach. And this person was not a person, even with everything that went down, that was not able to do that. But the feeling that I'm losing all my money, or everything is, in flux, that feeling makes a person feel unsure, even if they have more money than they could ever spend in their whole life.
people felt when they were losing huge sums of money that they were no longer safe.
That's the time to give.
Dan says, brilliant, he says, that's the time to give. I love it. Really gorgeous idea. 100%. But now imagine for 1 second. Imagine for 1 second. A guy like that who has so much. You think to yourself, what's the big deal? You lost just this small amount. It's not a huge problem, is it? And I was reminded of this story when I learned this midrash. Moshe Rabbeinu says, you know why I'm going to disguise the name of the place? Because maybe I'll embarrass them. And if I embarrass them, I'm going to lose my whole portion le'olam haba. Can we just think for 1 second how rich Moshe was in olam haba? The merit of taking out the entire Jewish nation from Egypt. The merit of bringing the Torah to the Jewish people. The merit of the miracles and of splitting the sea, of the Kiddush Hashem, of the dedication to the people to the point where he's going to collapse Nabol Tibol like it says in Parashat Yitro. He's such a rich guy he can afford to lose a little bit. Moshe says, I can't, how could I ever? I'm going to lose all my Gan Eden. My friends, if a person that's that wealthy in Zechut is scared to mess with this beast, how much more so people like me and you, how many Zechuyot do we have already? Our bank accounts, thank God we're doing well. We've done some mitzvot maybe. We learned some Torah. We did some nice things. Right? But do you have money to throw away? You have Zechut to throw away? But let's try and look at this with an even closer lens. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu waits, as the Gemara tells us, his entire lifetime to rebuke the Jews. Only now does he give them this speech, lifnei moto, before he dies. Chachamim say, a person when you give rebuke should wait until before he passes away. Why? Because then the person will know that you're not doing it out of anger or out of ego. You're doing it because you really want to leave him a last will and testament. You want to leave him some guidance in this life, and they won't be insulted. Imagine someone sitting by their father's or grandfather's deathbed, and he calls him in and he says, listen, here's my advice to you. You spend a little bit too much time at the office. How would you say at that moment? You cry, you give your father, your grandfather a hug. I want you to spend a little bit more time with your family. What would you say at that moment? You're embarrassed? You say 100%, thank you so much. That's what you would say. Moshe waits all this time. Does he slam them, put out newspaper articles about how the Jewish people were terrible, they did this unbelievable sin? He hints, even just with a hint. He waits until the end of his life. He condenses it to a hit. It's his job to give them tochacha as the leader of the people. So he's the one who's supposed to say it. And still he was so afraid. Kal vachomer, how much more so for us? Where sometimes we get involved in something that it's none of our business. We have no place inserting our nose in that problem, in that issue. We have no place. We have no right to say anything. Not only that, we're not clean in that thing ourselves. I remember seeing someone once, not in this synagogue, of course, it never happened here, but in another synagogue, a guy who talked throughout the whole prayers. And then I saw at the end of the tefillah, he turns around and he shushed somebody else. So I wasn't in my own shul, so it wasn't my place to go give him tochacha. But again, I have a sharp tongue, and I put it away when I was a young man. I tried to, because I like to come with love, not with... But I wanted to go up to him and ask him if he was shushing the guy because he couldn't hear himself in his own conversations. See, disturbing your talking, so you have to shush him. Is that what's going on? You understand? Moshe, it's his job. He doesn't go overboard. He waits until the right time. He does everything right, and he's still afraid to go one tiny bit too much. Sometimes you have to give rebuke. But how far did you go? Did you do it in public? Was it your place to say? Are you clean from that sin yourself? It's just, look at how careful our great leader Moshe Rabbeinu was. How much more so should we be? You know, I remember once I was sitting with somebody and the guy told me, listen, I really feel like I need to say something. I said, why? He said, Rabbi, it's a mitzvah in the Torah. I said, you're absolutely correct. I said, but I kind of have the feeling that for you, Hashem would rather you did the other 612 before you focused on this one. I mean, that's the mitzvah you want to pull out of the Torah first? In those moments, it's not a person doing a mitzvah. In those moments, a person is taking his negative character trait and putting on it a nice suit and tie and a hat and making it look like a Rosh Yeshiva. Like, you know what I mean? That's what you're making, your critical nature, your bashing nature. You just figured out a way to make it look religious. That's what you did. Is that appropriate? Is that correct? My friends, in those moments, you have to double check your motives. I saw the rabbi said a beautiful derash in the pasuk. The pasuk, he quotes a pasuk in Rav Karlenstein. He quotes a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, where the pasuk says, I love this. Tzedek yalin ba ve'ata meratzchim. The literal interpretation means righteousness lived there in Jerusalem, ve'ata, and now meratzchim. Now they're killing in the streets of Jerusalem during the times of the Khurban. The rabbi says beautiful. He says, you know what the pasuk means? He says, when it comes to tzedek, when it comes to the other 612 mitzvot, yalin ba, the guy's like, I'll do it tomorrow. Let's sleep over. Tzedek sleeps over. But ve'ata meratzchim. When it comes to assassinating someone's character, that they do immediately. There's no waiting. They're not fact-checking. They're ready to already decide the guy did this. He's wrong. He's a crook. She's this. They're that. Unbelievable. Tzedek yalin ba. When it comes to other mitzvot. But this mitzvah, favorite mitzvah in the whole Torah. Some people like achnasat orchim. Some people like tzedakah. Some people's favorite mitzvah is rebuking people. My friends, I want to share with you a beautiful story from the Sanzer Rebbe. There was a rabbi who was very outspoken, and he was always knocking all the people in his keilah. Guy comes late, he's in front of everybody. He. You know? The guy is correcting everything, just... So they went to him and they said, Rabbi, we know your intention is to make the people better, but is it the right way to do it the way that you're doing it? To kill the guy like that? The rabbi said very interesting. You know what he said? He said, you're right. He said, but if it will make him better, I will gladly lose my olam haba. I mean, that's a interesting comment, right? Anyway, the people went to the Sanzer Rebbe, and they were saying, look, this is the situation. The rabbi, we told him, the rabbi said, I'm happy to lose my olam haba if it will make the people better. The rabbi smiled, and he said, well, is he ready to lose his olam hazeh? They said, what do you mean? They said, would he give up his apartment so that people will get better? Would he take a pay cut so people will get better? Will he suffer humiliation in this world so people can get better? It's only his olam haba he's willing to give away. That doesn't mean that he's a dedicated leader. That means he's a person who either doesn't believe in Olam Haba or doesn't value it. When we said Kol HaMabim Pnei Havero Berabim Ein Lo Chelek LeOlam Haba, we were serious. Imagine working so much in your lifetime to create a spiritual reality for yourself. And by the way, people, when you think about Olam Haba, everyone gets very esoteric. You know, when I pass away, after 120, my soul is going to go to this place, and hopefully, and it will be Olam Haba. That's a Gan Eden. But I think that there's something that people are misunderstanding here. Olam Haba, Gan Eden, is when a person is eternally in a space where their soul is purified, rectified, and uplifted. And to be in that state for all time, that is heaven. To not be embarrassed by your deeds in the world of truth where you can't explain or make excuses, that's heaven. For a second, let's not get so Kabbalistic, so metaphysical. Let's just talk about the status, the stature of the soul that you're investing in. That's what we're talking about here. When you rip someone to shreds, says the Chachamim, you destroy your soul. How many mitzvot do we do with the aim of being spiritual people, of doing the right thing? Says the Gemara, all of that investment. It's like a person who decides that they want to save all of their money, and they're afraid of the banks. And Mishtabach Shemo, the guy made a lot of money. He's got no more room under the mattress. So what does he do? He buys himself a boat, and he fills it with $100 bills. And then, after stuffing the boat with as many $100 bills as he can, he drills a hole in the bottom of the boat. And while he's drilling, he's still putting more money in the boat. That's what we do when we humiliate somebody. You took the soul that you put everything into, and you made it Ein Lo Chelek LeOlam Haba. That's what it means. So my friends, when we look at a time like this, a time like the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, it's primarily built around the concept of making sure that we are sensitive to the feelings of others. And if we're insensitive to those feelings, before we could talk about it, I always say this, before we could talk about loving people, ahavat chinam, could we just talk about not killing them? Right? Could we just stop with this part? With a comment, with a tweet, with a text message, with a WhatsApp, with a comment in shul, with a look when the guy goes up to the Sefer Torah. Could we just try and do this? I'll share with you one last piece that I read. There was a fellow in Jerusalem who opened up an organization that the rabbis didn't like. They thought it was a very bad idea, and the ramifications of this place would be disastrous. I'm not going to go into what the organization was. In truth, I don't really know all the details of what it was, but I know that the rabbis felt it was a terrible idea. So it was decided that Rav Shach, at the time, would travel from Bnei Brak. He was almost 90 years old. He would travel from Bnei Brak to Jerusalem to speak to this elderly man. The person who was running this organization explained to him that what he was doing actually wasn't helpful, it was harmful. Rabbi says, okay, gets in the car, travels from Bnei Brak through the traffic to Jerusalem, gets to the man's house, sits down, and his gabai is sitting with him. And the rabbi says to the elderly man, he says, do you remember where you grew up in Lithuania, the city? How about this guy? Have you heard from Yankel, Shmerel, this, that? Talking about nothing. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Rabbi says, thank you so much. It's been so nice catching up with you. And he signals to the guy that they should leave. They both get up and they walk out. And the guy can't believe the rabbi came all the way here, started with the small talk and never got to the point. He didn't mention one word about the organization. He says to the rabbi, what happened? Rav Shach said, I don't know if you realized, but when we were sitting there, the rabbi's wife brought in some refreshments. She was standing in the room by the door. And how could I criticize something her husband did in front of his wife? How could I make her feel that way? How could I make him feel that way in front of his wife? Can't do it. The rabbi traveled from Bnei Brak. He said, listen, he goes, Rabbi, you should have given me the signal. Give me the wink. I would have taken the woman, we would have went into the kitchen. I would have asked her to make me a tea. I would have come up with a question. I would have distracted something. Rav Shach said, even if she doesn't hear, if she finds out, if she can sense that she's being asked to leave the room because there's something critical, that's not part of why I came. So if need be, I'll go back to Bnei Brak, I'll schedule another appointment, I'll come back again. So long as I don't have to say something negative to this man in front of his wife. Unbelievable. And I see this all the time. At a wedding, guy comes up with his wife, fellow standing next to me will say to the guy and his wife, we don't see you in shul anymore. Rabbi, tell him. I was like, don't drag me to hell with you. You embarrassed him in front of his wife, in front of me, in front of my wife. And you want me jumping on that bandwagon? And we think? We think, how sometimes on a package it will say, OU means kosher. JSOR means kosher. We think that because you could put a sign on, there's a sign that says kosher. I've noticed that what people think makes humiliating someone in front of friends, in front of family, what makes it kosher? An elbow. Rabbi, you don't go to shul no more. What is that? OU? You koshered it because you said afterwards, I'm sketching? That's the kosher stamp for humiliating somebody. So my friends, everybody talks a lot about ahavah chinam, loving people for no reason. Baseless love. Before we get to baseless love, what about just not humiliating people? Just not embarrassing? Could we manage that? Could we start with that? Who better to learn from than Moshe Rabbeinu, who had every right to say this, who himself was perfect on the issues, who hinted at it, who waited the right time, and still he was terrified of the ramifications of getting it wrong. I kind of think that we all could err on the side of caution, myself included, on this issue. And Be'ezrat Hashem, when we're careful with dealing with someone else's honor, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will also restore our national honor, our Bet HaMikdash, our return to Eretz Israel. B'mhera v'yamenu. Amen.